It began as a glance, a fleeting moment that should have meant nothing. Chris, Mark's 25-year-old nephew, had come to stay with us while finishing his graduate program. Mark had always been close to his younger brother, and when Chris needed a place to stay for a few months, we both agreed it was the right thing to do. At the time, my marriage was already strained. Mark and I had been together for 12 years, and somewhere along the way, we lost the spark. The early days of passion and shared dreams had given way to silence and routine. Conversations became surface level, affection sporadic, and intimacy practically non-existent. I felt invisible in my own home. Chris arrived with a suitcase and a smile, bringing with him an energy I hadn't felt in years. He was confident, charming, and easy to talk to, a stark contrast to the growing distance between Mark and me. I told myself it was harmless to enjoy his company. After all, he was family. What could possibly happen? The slow descent. The first few weeks were innocent enough. Chris and I would talk during breakfast or while Mark worked late. He'd ask me about my interests, listen intently, and laugh at my jokes in a way that made me feel seen. It was intoxicating to be noticed, to feel like I mattered. I didn't see it happening at first. It started with small things, a lingering glance, a touch that lasted a second too long. Then, one evening, as we stood in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner, he brushed a strand of hair from my face. My heart skipped a beat, and I frowned, caught in a moment that felt electric and dangerous. From that point on, everything changed. The lines blurred, and the boundaries I'd held so firmly began to waver. We found excuses to be alone, walking the dog, running errands, or staying up late talking about anything and everything. The tension between us was palpable, and I knew I was playing with fire, yet I couldn't seem to stop. Crossing the line. It happened on a rainy Friday night. Mark had gone out of town for a work conference, leaving Chris and me alone in the house. We ordered pizza, drank wine, and watched a movie, the atmosphere charged with unspoken tension. When the credits rolled, neither of us moved. The room was silent, except for the rain tapping against the windows. He turned to me, his eyes searching mine, and for a moment, I forgot everything, vows I made, the life I'd built, the man I was betraying. When Chris leaned in and kissed me, I didn't pull away. I should have, but I didn't. What followed was a blur of passion and guilt, a night that left me both exhilarated and hollow. As I lay awake afterward, the weight of what I'd done pressed down on me like a stone. I told myself it was a mistake, a one-time lapse in judgment, but deep down, I knew it wasn't over. The double life. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of secrecy and deceit. Chris and I became experts at sneaking around, stealing moments whenever we could. I told myself it wasn't hurting anyone, that Mark would never know, and that it was just a phase, but the guilt gnawed at me, growing heavier with each passing day. Mark started noticing changes in my behavior. I was more distant, distracted, and constantly on edge. He'd ask if I was okay, if something was bothering me, and I'd brush him off with a smile and a lie. The distance between us widened, and I hated myself for what I was doing to him. Chris, too, began to struggle with the situation. He'd vacillate between passion and regret, questioning whether we should continue. But every time we tried to stop, the pull between us proved too strong. The discovery. The end came on an ordinary Tuesday evening. Mark had left work early to surprise me with dinner, something he hadn't done in years. I didn't know he was home until I heard the front door slam, the sound reverberating through the house like a gunshot. He found us in the guest room, the place where Chris had been staying. The look on Mark's face was one I'll never forget: shock, betrayal, and rage all rolled into one. He stood frowning for a moment, his eyes darting between us as if trying to comprehend what he was seeing. You've got to be kidding me, he said, his voice trembling with disbelief. With him, my nephew. Mark, I started, but he cut me off, his voice rising. Don't you dare try to explain this, he spat, his hands clenched into fists. He turned to Chris, his face dark with anger. Get out of my house. Nah. Chris stammered an apology, his face pale, before grabbing his things and leaving. The door slammed shut behind him, and then it was just Mark and me, standing in the wreckage of our marriage. Why? He asked, his voice breaking. How could you do this to me, to us? Tears streamed down my face as I tried to explain, but the words felt hollow, meaningless. There was no excuse, No justification for what I'd done. I had betrayed him in the worst way possible, and there was no going back. The fallout. Mark left that night, taking only a bag of clothes and his car keys. The next morning, I received a text, "I'm filing for divorce. Don't contact me." The days that followed were a blur of pain and regret. Chris refused to speak to me, distancing himself from the situation entirely. Friends and family caught wind of the scandal, and the judgment was swift and unforgiving. I became a pariah, the woman who destroyed her marriage for a fling with her nephew-in-law. I spent countless nights lying awake, replaying every moment, every choice, every mistake. I couldn't escape the guilt, the shame, the crushing weight of knowing I'd destroyed not just my marriage, but the trust and respect of everyone around me. Reflection and consequences. Months passed, and the divorce was finalized. Mark and I didn't speak again, and I knew he'd never forgive me. I didn't blame him. I couldn't even forgive myself. I started therapy, desperate to understand how I'd let my life spiral out of control. It was a painful process, forcing me to confront my own insecurities, my dissatisfaction with my marriage, and the selfishness that had led me to betray the man I once loved. I had to face the reality that I'd been looking for validation in all the wrong places, filling a void within myself at the expense of others. Life didn't return to normal, it couldn't. The relationships I'd damaged couldn't be repaired, and the scars I'd left on Mark's heart would never fully heal. But slowly, I began to find the way forward. I focused on rebuilding myself, learning from my mistakes, and vowing never to let my weaknesses define me again. Epilogue. Betrayal is a choice, and choices have consequences. I'll carry the weight of mine for the rest of my life. I lost everything: my husband, my family, and the person I thought I was. But in the ashes of my mistakes, I found a painful truth. Healing begins with accountability, and redemption is a road I'll have to walk alone.